this business trip, I was going to spend a few days somewhere in the wilderness again. But this time, I was going to test out a completely new option. While looking for possible options for renting an off-road vehicle equipped in such a way that you could spend a few days in it without having to visit a motel in the meantime, I came across the Turo app and found a Ford Bronco, for which, for an additional fee, it was possible to rent camping gear. Sarah, the host, turned out to be brilliant and flexible enough to modify the gear for me, adding at my request a mat that leveled the floor so that after folding the rear seat, I could lie flat, so sleeping comfort seemed to be under control. Having a mattress, a sleeping bag, a chair, a table, a gas burner with a gas cartridge at my disposal, I couldn't wait to find myself somewhere away from the hustle and bustle of the city. So on the morning of April 20th, 2023, I took a taxi and headed to Henderson, where my well-equipped Bronco was waiting for me at the agreed location. After arriving at the destination, all I had to do was open the car from the app, take the key out of the glove compartment, check if everything was as ordered, pack my belongings, and finally set off into the unknown. From Henderson, I took US 93 towards Kingman, then took I-40 to Flagstaff, and then CR3 heading south. I continued on AZ-87, then AZ-188, and finally, near the Roosevelt Dam, I entered AZ-88, also known as the Apache Trail, running along the Salt River. The next 5 miles is a demanding section of a dirt road. There are several places where only one vehicle can pass through, and there are often sheer drops straight down to the water. In general, it's getting slowly dark, so I really want to find a suitable place to stay, necessarily by the water and preferably in an uncrowded place. Hence, this place turned out to be a perfect spot. The morning greeted me exactly the way I like. Almost totally empty spot with just one other vehicle, undisturbed sounds of nature, soft at first but very quickly increasingly sharper light of the rising sun reflected on the surrounding hills, and vegetation, nothing like what we have in Poland.
Good morning, everyone. As you can see, this time a little bit different conditions than usual. But it's impossible to get my prowler anywhere in the world, especially when you're traveling for such a short time, because I have only like 6 days. I've been trying to travel for a few years around Vegas when I do my business trip and checking different possibilities, and finally I'm here in the nice 2022 Bronco, which you can see I find myself quite comfortable in. So yeah, it's possible. Maybe it's not the cheapest option, but you can spend time in some remote places hiring some additional camping gear and making yourself cozy inside the car.
So, in such wonderful circumstances, I plan to spend my day in total inactivity. Almost. Right after this trip, I was supposed to take an exam, for which I still had a lot of material to cover, so I was going to take care of that too, but of course, I started the day with a lazy breakfast, which, despite the early hour and quite strong wind, took place in a very pleasant temperature. The yellow carpet of flowers on the reddish hills was stunning. The azure waters of the lake embedded in this landscape encountered me to cool down my body, heated by the sun's rays, and since the place with a sandy, flat beach was conducive to this, I could not resist the temptation. And when it seemed that nothing more interesting would happen that day, other tourists began to arrive. One of them was Casey. While looking for a convenient place as close to the water as possible, she came across a muddy part of the shore and got stuck. Initially, we tried to drive out of the rut, but the traction control system effectively interfered with these approaches by cutting off the power at key moments, so we had to look for another solution. Casey didn't have a dedicated tow rope and suggested load securing straps. I was convinced they wouldn't survive the ordeal, but Casey was determined. Having no other solution to propose, we tried it out and it ended as I expected. The straps fell apart and the set didn't even move. Fortunately, it turned out that Casey uses a steel cable to secure the load on the trailer platform against theft. And since it seemed to be thick enough to be durable, I decided to use it. It was long enough to be fastened twice, which increased the chance of survival, and we made a second attempt at pulling the rig out. Knowing that this was the last option, and that we had nothing else that could serve as a tow if the line broke, I tried to do it as gently as possible. I engaged lower gearbox in the Bronco, and after stretching the cable, moved slowly forward. Immediately, I didn't even feel like I was pulling anything. The Bronco moved off without any problems, and the entire set was once again on solid enough ground to not sink again. As you can hear, the whole action was appreciated by the other tourists who also appeared on the shore, but of course especially by Casey herself, who breathed a sigh of relief and hugged me in a burst of joy caused by gratitude that I was in the right place at the right time.
Is up there.
I think it's fine. I mean, this was really close to the water. You can see because of the greenery there. So.
Yeah.
After unplugging the rig and a short consultation, Casey was able to start looking for a convenient position for her kit again. I didn't know then, but Casey probably did, that the place wouldn't be so empty all the time and that she wanted the place to her and rig in a way to isolate herself from the tourists who would show up on the weekend and have an unobstructed view of the water in front of her. Casey arrived with her dog, Wyatt. Those who follow my channel know that I have always been a dog person, so this moment of activity gave me a lot of joy and was also a good cardio workout for me. It would seem that these short legs would not be able to move fast enough to overtake me in a race to the stick, but it quickly turned out that I was very wrong. Additionally, Wyatt's energy was inexhaustible. And so, splashing around for a good hour in the not very clear crystal water, I spent time doing activities that I had not expected at all. And, as it soon turned out, this was not the end of surprises, because I had just met Scott. Scott had a watercraft, jet ski, and to my surprise, he offered me a ride on the lake. I've probably never received such an offer from a stranger, so at first I felt a bit shy, but quickly got over it, and the perspective of experiencing the area from this unusual side was definitely exciting. Following Scott's example, I also put my head on for this ride. I just forgot to nail it to my head. I have no idea what method Scott used, that his was immovable, but I was fighting with mine. It is definitely not the easiest thing to take off in such conditions, especially when the other wrist is being broken out at the same time by the air pressure pushing on the camera. You can clearly see we were flying across the water like a rocket, and even my glasses were in danger. Apache Lake is one of 4 artificial reservoirs created along the Salt River. It is 17 miles long and was formed in 1927 when the Horse Mesa Dam on the west was completed. It is set among sun-painted canyon walls which form scenic backdrops to the lake itself. It represents an interesting hybrid of both a lake and a river. This is true enough, as the canyon-bound reservoir still has significant no-turbulent flow and the riverine appearance to its long, narrow course. The Salt River is named after the brackish taste of its water. Salt comes from the salt springs and salt deposits located in its upper reaches and through which the river flows. The Apaches traditionally obtained salt from these deposits. Having reached the western end of the lake, we set off in a race to its other end. The weather, the views, the speed, all this was the perfect recipe for a time well spent. I must admit that the passenger seat was burning my butt a bit, and I thought that one day I would have to try such an activity, but at the controls of a similar master, because the whole ride reminded me of riding a motorcycle, which I also love. And I was surprised by Scott again. As you can see, I didn't have to wait long to fulfill my dream. Scott asked me to take the controls and I gladly accepted. And as I expected, the driving experience was very close to what I know from 2 wheels. The proverbial wind in your hair combined with a great speed, intensified by the fact that everything took place on the water, were definitely impressions that I will remember for a long time.
Pull that in, now give it a little gas.
Oh, alright. Oh man, it's so natural when you're riding a motorcycle. It's just fun.
Yeah.
I understood you, like you said, this thing does 17 miles per hour. I was like, okay, it does 17.
Yeah, so it goes a little faster with one person.
Yeah, as you could see, even 75 miles per hour. 120 kilometers per hour. That was crazy experience.
And stop before it hits shore, because I don't want to suck up anything into the impeller. There you go. You can get me up close, I'll just jump out and move it on.
So I will get there. There's a here. Ah, it's good.
Stop.
All right, we've done it.
We survived.
The evening at Upper Burnt Corral, as that was the name of the place where I stayed for the first 2 nights, was nothing like the evening 24 hours earlier. Probably because it was a Friday evening and weekend tourists came to the lake shore. After all, this place is less than an hour away from the big city of Phoenix. As you probably already know, I'm not a big fan of campgrounds. In fact, I hate them. I'd much rather boondock, and with a few hours, this place began to resemble a camping site. Quite crowded one. So I decided to leave as early in the morning as possible. The night before, Scott, Casey and I had agreed to ride part of the Apache Trail. Scott was going to take Casey to his Toyota and show us around. Then we were to part ways. Casey was to stay a few more days, Scott was going back to his place, I was going to move on, heading for Yuma. So, eager to leave this increasingly crowded place, I decided to wait for my companions a little farther out of the way and hit the trail first. The trail itself did not pose any difficulties when it comes to driving, at least in the part we traveled through. You can easily do it in a standard car. It was a section of State Road 88 running along the river lake, slowly moving away from towards the southwest. However, we do not drive right next to the coastline, so the view of the water is often obstructed by the surrounding hills. On the left, we have Superstition Wilderness. On the right, on the other side of the river, Four Peaks Wilderness. The area we are in is a part of a larger area called Tonto National Forest and was historically inhabited by the Tonto Apaches. While looking for some information about this area, I came across an interesting explanation of the name itself. Initially, the name Tonto Apache was applied to almost all Indians in the Arizona territory between the White Mountains and the Colorado River, which rules out the theory that the Tonto Apache were a special group of Apaches. But the Apache themselves reportedly referred to groups living in the Tonto Basin area that were so isolated that they had the characteristic of separate groups and developed dialectical differences that other Apaches did not understand as crazy people or wild people. The native dialect was rendered in Spanish as tonto, meaning stupid, so it might be conjectured that outsiders considering that any Indian venturing into this area was foolish. But more likely, the group was described as crazy or savage because they lived in great isolation far from popular trade routes. You know, the "you have to be nuts to live in that country" type of thing. And there might be some truth to that. This area, 100 years ago, must have been a total desert wasteland. Apart from the cacti that clearly stands out against the dwarf green background, there is not much tall greenery here, especially one that could provide shelter from the heat pouring from the sky. This section of gravel road is called Revis Trailhead and once led to Revis Ranch. The views of the Apache Lake and Superstition Mountains are amazing from here. This severity of the area, softened by the cut in the form of an artificially created lake, undoubtedly has a much gentler look now than it did in the times of the pioneers. Apart from the postcard shots, Casey also drew my attention to the abundance of flowers at this time of year. Some plants, apart from their purely aesthetic values, also turn out to have properties that could save lives. For example, in the case of rattlesnake bite.
Thing of it. So if you pick that and boil it down and turn it into a paste and put it on your wound, it will help draw the poison out.
Hopefully I will not have to try it.
Such knowledge, acquired from locals, has a double value. Apart from its purely practical application, it allows you to better understand the idea of how people lived and perhaps in some cases still live in such inhospitable conditions for humans, and in which survival depends on your awareness of the nature. And this is how my visit to this place ends. Enriched with new experiences, I headed west towards the Kofa National Wild Refuge, but more about it in the next episode.